Hey guys, this is Jamie. So today I'm without makeup because I'm getting used to medicine, and I've been really all over the place. Physically, but mentally I've been better. Anyway, today I want to talk about specifically more about the Brazilian and more Portuguese trans community, and specifically definitions and the way non-binary, trans femme, trans masc are mostly seen. And I do have to preface that obviously right now what's happening in the Anglosphere, how to put this, in the US you have, well, the Trump election going through in his cabinet, so you don't know what's really going to happen. There's Project 2025. In the UK in general, you still have Turf Island being normal, while so this video is more about, in a vacuum, what needs to be done, and I even actually consider if I should be doing this video in Portuguese because I found it interesting, kind of how the Brazilian community, the trans community, talks about non-binary issues, and how, in my opinion, it could be more applicable in Portugal and should be sort of more seen, because I see it more obviously in a Brazilian perspective, and in Portugal there isn't enough sort of too good sort of conversations between medical professionals and non-binary, trans masc, trans femme people. So it's more about that. So I guess this is a very sort of niche video, but regardless. And I do have to preface by the fact that this is very, very nuanced, and I spoke, for instance, to my partner who's Brazilian, and obviously I'm more of an activist than my partner, and I spend more time in LGBT spaces. I spend more time talking to other activists, to other people as well. So his opinion is more from having someone who grew up in Brazil, which is absolutely valid, but not from as much of an activist perspective. But it's still something that was raised, and anyway, I found it quite interesting, and gave me food for thought as well. So I do have to preface, so for instance, the Anglosphere, and where I'll be posting this, which is mostly Reddit, we have a lot of discussions, we have a lot of infighting, specifically in the trans men, trans masc communities, about whether trans masc should be an umbrella term for everyone. Like, for instance, I try to sort of devise those two. So when I talk about people, when I give talks, I tend to say trans men and trans masculine people. I can, maybe I've slipped and said trans masculine, just that, but I do think that there is a very important parts and the reasons we need to distinction those two terminologies. They do have an overlap, obviously, but I do find it harmful to sort of use, for instance, certain things like they, them for trans men, which do not want that to be used on them. So, for instance, if a trans masc person wants to go by he, they, obviously they can go by theirs, by any pronoun, by any of those. And if a trans man goes by he, him, it is misgendering to call the trans man they, them. So it is misgendering to call him a they in this case. And I'll be talking more about the trans massphere, but I will go into the trans femsphere in a bit. So, and obviously there has been a rise from what I've seen, like in Reddit and in general in the Anglosphere, sort of, there's a lot of infighting between trans men and trans masc people, and people tend to sort of gravitate that trans masc are better or more friendly due to the patriarchy and etc. and a bunch of other reasons, without realizing that, well, everyone's kind of a loser in this society, specifically from the LGBT community. And everyone suffers from different oppression. This isn't suppression Olympics in any way. So I do have to say that I find it very uncomfortable, and I highly disagree with the idea that a trans man, for instance, is as bad as a man, and men are bad in general. And then I disagree with the opinion that trans men are different from men and are not as bad as men. So we'll get that straight. But what I wanted to say was, so we have that, and then we have different opinions, like sort of to emphasize that a person's trans state is used. And this is what I find interesting, that in the Brazilian trans community, it's quite different, like from what I've seen on ground, what I've seen online, what I've talked to people about. And I do have to say that obviously what I've read, what I've heard, what I've discussed, I'm not a trans masc Brazilian, and I'm using the terminology more trans masc because it's an English community, really. And but I do have to say that I enjoy the fact that trans masc and trans men binary are differentiated, and it is very different. So for instance, I know there's different like publications which just focus on the trans masc experience, and they do not include trans men, and it like there is like publications focused on trans masc identities, and the terminology. First, I originally thought, because of the terminology, that boyceta was more of a way to refer to genitalia, actually, and but apparently it's also an identity, and that is something that I recently found out. And I do have to say that as someone who speaks Portuguese and who was not as well versed in this terminology, it took me a bit by surprise, because it's a very sort of in-your-face terminology. And but I do have to say that I really appreciate that it is its own identity. It encompasses, from what I understand, sort of the umbrella experience for trans masc people. And there are, for instance, like in Brazil, like studies talk about it, talk about trans masc, boyceta, healthcare, and etc., pregnancy, and etc., without touching the binary trans men. I do have to say that when I was looking at certain publications, I was kind of like, yeah, but there are still binary trans men which, for instance, do not opt for bottom surgery. So the assumption that bottom surgery is only done by binary trans men isn't the right approach, in my opinion, but it still is, I guess, a more of a trans masc maybe experience. I do not have enough data to say if it's binary or trans masc people who go more for pregnancy, obviously. But the fact that these two are very separated in certain terms and in certain things that can cause dysphoria for binary trans men, and which have been issues in other, such as like the Anglo-trans spheres, really. So I do appreciate that, and I do feel like it should be something that I do wish we had in more Anglosphere usage, really, because there isn't exactly an erasure of binary trans men in Brazil, or from what I see. So obviously, seeing that it's its own thing, and you can identify or not, but it's something, it's its own identity, is very important. And I do have to say that obviously Portuguese is a very, very gendered language. There have been obviously quite a few attempts of trying to do a gender neutral pronoun. There's quite a few floating around, and it's still very debated which one to use, which one not to use, how do you refer to people. But in general, I find it interesting that we went from so many years ago where Brazil was completely transphobic, and now I'm seeing something completely different. Like, for instance, seeing my partner grow up in Rio and seeing that like his neighborhood has like bars where drag queens perform, and like we would have never thought of that like when we were both growing up, really. So obviously seeing all this progress is amazing, actually. And with the trans community as well, like my in-laws accept me, they're more than fine with me being trans, and which is completely opposite from what I thought that my family would be more accepting, and they're out of my life, so it's completely different. So Brazil has sort of gone in terms of growth that I've never expected. I'm not saying that it does not have issues. There are still issues. There's still, unfortunately, murders. There's still a lot of transphobia, but it's still going places, and it's going. The fact that there is even a proper discussion about non-binary identities is amazing, actually. And same for Portugal. It's just that in Portugal, there's a lot of sort of infighting. Like, you still have non-binary, trans-masc, trans-femme people getting hormones, but there's still a lot of push from the medical sectors, because non-binary people can be frustrated that they're not being understood, or they can sort of have to say certain things. Like back in the day when people would, trans people would share between themselves, like what to answer in order to get hormones if their experience wasn't as sort of textbookish. So now it's changing, you don't have that as much. And I do believe that it's very important, like obviously, to talk to your doctor. And I do understand that I'm saying this from a point of privilege, because I'm very sort of binary, and I never really had any issues with the medical system. So, and I don't know, I really try to get along with doctors in general, so I'm not the right person. But I have heard of, like, I have talked with people who kind of say that trans people can be a bit, obviously a trans person can experience transphobia through the medical system and through other doctors. So obviously they can go very sort of loaded and with lots of anxiety and be rude to staff, and vice versa. And staff cannot maybe not understand the non-binary experience. Like, I've had to teach personnel on how to deal with trans people because they weren't equipped. Simply because it's not a thing, and this is still very sort of it's recent that we are finessing, actually, sort of the non-binary care, and still, like everywhere probably in the world, we still deal with a lot of transphobic doctors. So obviously with people who don't have it's not that they don't have enough patience. If their patience has run thin, or they've gone to bad doctors, of course they're going to be very agitated, very nervous, and can burst out on the doctor. And same for the doctor, who's understaffed and underpaid. And so this is what happens, really. So I do feel like there needs to be communication from both sides, actually. And that's why I like looking at the fact that I see more discussions about transmasc identities from Brazil rather than Portugal. Obviously, I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, this is what we need. We need more research here on non-binary people to help them, because I'm really kind of, I feel bad for my transmasc sort of friends, acquaintances, etc. Like, sure, they get hormones in the end, but I hear all the stories. I hear the mistreatments, and I don't want fellow trans people to suffer. Like, we all deserve quality healthcare. So this is very important, and I do feel like by explaining, by showing sort of like examples, like in Brazil there's this research and etc., it would be beneficial. And in general, sort of, I do everything I can to sort of like talk to personnel, answer questions, do talks like I have in the past, and I really sort of try to educate people in workplaces and wherever I can, if the opportunity allows. And yeah, so I just really feel like it needs to be a two-way street. So obviously, I'm not saying if your patient has worn out thin and if you're non-binary and you can't seem to get your points across, you also need to understand that certain things, like, I'm not entirely sure on, like, because I've seen like transmasc non-binary people sort of go on hormones and go off hormones. I'm not a doctor to say that. This is something that needs to be discussed with a doctor, be monitored under supervision. And I don't really agree, like, for instance, like with the blue sky model of everyone can try hormones. I only advocate for DIY in cases where you cannot access it due to different, how to put this, in some countries you just don't have HRT legally. But if it's a country where you can, I would really appreciate you to do all the resources, not just for yourself, but for other trans people to be able to access that as well. And obviously, if you can, because it is very difficult sometimes to get through to doctors. So this whole thing is that factually non-binary people and doctors need to both cooperate in order to understand, like, what is the hormonal, the surgery treatments for non-binary people to alleviate their dysphoria, really. And then the other side of the coin is trans femme people, and this is where I was talking to my partner, and travesti is obviously, it used to be a slur back in the day in Brazil, and it was something derogatory that he'd use for trans women and trans femme people and cross-dressers and sex workers. While right now it's more reclaimed as an identity, more of a trans femme identity as well. But it has some usage where people use it for a cross-dresser or derogatory and etc. But I do have to say that I really feel like it's good when people reclaim, and again, just like the transmasc, I do feel like it's important to have a definition and different identity words for people to define, to identify, to feel more comfortable with a label if they feel comfortable with that label. And this is where I was like talking to my partner, and my partner grew up in a relative conservative family, and with conservative values, but at the same time they're very, 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 very open-minded. So so it's quite again, like, they're very welcoming to me, and my partner has other LGBT members in the family. So but still, kind of like growing up, he kind of saw, like, obviously in the zeros, 90s, Brazil was very transphobic in the sense as well. So obviously, he sees like travesty being reclaimed, so he kind of feels like, oh, why are people reclaiming slurs? And it is a valid discussion, actually, when people reclaim slurs, because, but at the same time, it's not my partner's place, it's not my place, but it's simply what I see. So, like, for instance, there was a graph going around who got elected in Brazil, trans identities which got elected, and I think quite a few identified as travesti, and obviously if travestis feel comfortable with that, then they should use it. And I do have to say that this is something I also talk about in depth. This is an identity and term which is only used by Brazilian travesti, Brazilian trans femme people who only identify with this term. This is not a terminology which is used in other languages. For instance, in Spanish you can use it as a cross-dresser, but in Portuguese it's just used specifically for trans femme people who identify as such. And if not used as that, it can be seen as derogatory, and you shouldn't use it. So for instance, in Portugal, no one really uses it unless they're Brazilian. And it should be kept as such, so it's more of a cultural identity. So it's, and again, because of its negative connotation, and I imagine this is why it's like that. And again, it's an identity that trans femme people reclaimed in Brazil. So it is also like, it's not like a trans woman it is not travesti unless she goes under the feeling, under the umbrella. So I do feel like we need to step away, like I've been saying, unless you identify with the, for instance, transmasculine while being binary, or trans feminine while being binary. So for instance, I don't feel comfortable when people are like, oh, you're transmasc. It's like, no, I'm pretty binary trans dude as you can find. And while we do have similar experiences with transmasc people, or I have no issue with shared spaces, I do feel that there have to be spaces which are specifically just for transmasc and specifically just for trans men. And if a space is specified for just one or the other, then there shouldn't be any overlap. So I'm quite rigid in that. But at the same time, I do feel like we need to stop the infighting and just accept that some spaces are for one, for the other, or for both, and stop fighting about it. And there are different identities, and that's the way it is really. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is come to Brazil, be like Brazil, I guess, in some terms. So yeah, this was pretty much what I want to talk about. This has been sort of brewing in my head for a bit. I was trying to think how to word it. I spoke with my partner about it. So yeah, also please keep in mind that I might have missed like some detail. I might be sort of saying from the experiences that I've read, heard, discussed. Obviously there are other opinions. This is not my identity. Any of these are not, besides the binary trans man and binary men in general. So obviously this is just from an observation perspective. This is also from someone who educates other people. And obviously it's fine to tell me, hey, I think you got this part a bit wrong. Or you might not agree with a certain part, and that's okay. And at the end of the day, you can also like disagree for your own personal sort of like, you might identify one thing and not with the other, even though it's the textbook says this or whatever. So it's fine. Like, please don't butcher me or yourself really for that. So yeah, this is pretty much what I wanted to say. I think this is a very friendly video, so if you want to discuss it with your mates or raise awareness, please feel free to share it. I'd really appreciate it. Have civil discussions, please. And I really appreciate all the love I've been getting, obviously. If you like this video, if you enjoy me informing you about certain things, please feel free to subscribe. Feel free to drop a comment, leave a like if you like this video, and thank you very much for watching. And now I'm gonna put on my glasses so that my eyes don't ache, because I've been a glasses wearer for quite a while now. Not a while, weeks, but you know. Thank you.